The Galilee, Galilee in Hebrew, is in the north of Israel. Galilee proper is the area between the Jezreel Valley in the south, the edge of the coastal plain in the west, the northern shores of the Sea of Galilee in the north, and the Jordan River and Sea of Galilee in the east. But for our purposes, we will include the region that extends to Mount Hermon and the Lebanese border in the north, known today as the Hula Valley, and also the Golan Heights on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. The most prominent topographical feature of the Galilee is the Jordan Rift, that seismic crack in the earth. Mount Hermon's snows and springs are the source of the Jordan River, which flows southward into the Sea of Galilee, and then on down the Jordan Rift to the Dead Sea. The Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake, some 13 miles long and 7 miles wide. It's the source of 30 to 40% of Israel's water supply today. And in New Testament times, it provided the livelihood for several of Jesus' disciples who were, as you know, fishermen. At 695 feet below sea level, the Sea of Galilee is the lowest freshwater lake in the world, and second only to the Dead Sea, a salt lake, as the lowest lake. At your hotel in Tiberias, you are about 650 feet below the level of the Mediterranean Sea, less than 50 miles to your west. In the Hebrew Bible, the Sea of Galilee is called the Sea of Kinneret, which has been restored now as the modern name in Israel. This is thought to come from the Hebrew word kinnor, which means harp, because the lake is in the shape of a harp, as this satellite photo will help you to see. Much of Jesus' ministry took place around this lake and on this lake. At the northwest corner of the lake are these cliffs, the Arbel Cliffs, with the valley of the winds and doves between them. When Jesus came from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee, he came down this valley, which was the route of the Via Maris. And the first town Jesus encountered on the shore was Magdala, the home of Mary Magdalene. And the excavations of Magdala are at the mouth of this valley. Often the cooler air above the cliffs meets with the rising warm air of the Jordan Rift, sending sudden and violent windstorms down that valley of the winds and doves and onto the lake as the heavier cool air rushes down. On other occasions, the east wind off the Golan Heights produces sudden storms. Who could forget the story of Jesus calming one of those storms with his word, "Peace, be still"? And it was here that Jesus walked on the waters of the lake. But the topographical feature of the Galilee that has most affected its history and culture is the Jezreel Valley. It connects the Mediterranean coast with the interior of Palestine. And the most important part of the Jezreel Valley is the pass at Megiddo. This is important because it was the strategic point that caused the major trade route between Egypt and Damascus and Mesopotamia, the Via Maris, the way of the sea, to pass through Galilee. And look how close this strategic link between the cradles of civilization comes to the places where Jesus' ministry took place, giving those places a contact with the wider world, making them places where people from many lands would come into contact. In fact, the history of ancient Israel is to a great extent the story of how it was in between the great ancient world powers and thus was caught up in their power struggles. When we go to Megiddo, our guide tells us about the many battles that were fought in the Jezreel Valley for control of the strategic pass at Megiddo. And when we are at Nazareth, we can stand at the brow of the hill and look across this beautiful and strategic valley. Turning to Galilee's biblical history, Abraham probably passed through the region in his migration from Haran to the Negev around 1750 BC. His first recorded stop in Canaan was in Shechem, just south of the Galilee. And Genesis chapter 14 tells us that Abraham pursued some Canaanite raiders who had kidnapped his nephew Lot to Dan in northern Galilee, where he probably saw an ancient city gate that you can see there. When the Israelites came into the land after the Exodus around 1250 BC, we find that the tribes of Issachar, Zebulun, and Naphtali were given lands in the Galilee, with the tribe of Manasseh in the adjacent Golan Heights. Later, the southern tribe of Dan migrated to northern Galilee to gain relief from the constant harassment of their warlike neighbors, the Philistines. The book of Judges tells of a battle that was fought in the Jezreel Valley against the army of the Canaanite king of Hatzor. One can visit the excavations at Hatzor, dating back to this time in Galilee's biblical history. The Galilee was part of the united monarchy under Saul, David, and Solomon from 1020 to 920 BC. And when the northern tribes split from the Davidic monarchy around 922 BC, the Galilee was part of the northern kingdom, which was called Israel, while the southern Davidic kingdom was known as Judah. In 721 BC, the northern kingdom fell to Assyria. The Assyrians had a strategy for keeping conquered peoples under subjection. They would relocate them in small communities to various places around their empire so that they would be surrounded by other foreign cultures. None of the cultural communities would be large enough to perpetrate any successful rebellions, and because they were different cultures and languages, could scarcely form coalitions. So the Israelites from the northern kingdom went into exile in foreign lands, and foreigners from pagan lands all across the Assyrian hegemony were relocated into Israel. Read an interesting story about this in 2 Kings chapter 17. It seems that these pagan peoples were being attacked and killed by lions. They reasoned that it was because they didn't know the laws of the God of the land. So they appealed to the Assyrian emperor to send them an Israelite priest to teach them the laws of the God of the land, which they then incorporated into their pagan practices. So the Galilee came to be regarded as Gentile and pagan territory by the Jews. Now this brings us to the best known and most important Old Testament reference to the Galilee. It came from the prophet Isaiah at the time when the southern kingdom of Judah was about to be defeated by the Babylonians, who would destroy Jerusalem and the temple and take the Jewish inhabitants into exile in Babylon. Isaiah wrote, "In the former time the Lord brought into contempt the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. But in the latter time He will make glorious the way of the sea," the Via Maris, "the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Isaiah saw the Galilee as playing a role in the coming of the Messiah. And this brings us to our main interest in Galilee as the venue for much of the life and ministry of our Lord Jesus Christ. Let's turn now to the Galilee of Jesus. Herod the Great became king around 37 BC as a puppet king of the Roman Empire. Herod ruled most of the traditional area of Israel. This was the Herod that we read about in the birth stories of Jesus. When Joseph took Mary and the young Jesus and fled to Egypt, it was because of Herod's pogrom to slaughter the male babies of Bethlehem. God revealed to Joseph that he could return to Israel when Herod died. So after Herod's death, Rome divided the kingdom among his sons. Archelaus ruled Samaria and Judea, and Herod Philip was to be the tetrarch of the Golan Heights in the northeast. Herod Antipas was to rule Galilee, and the east bank of the Jordan, and he did so from 4 BC until AD 39. So Herod Antipas was the Herod who interacted with the adult Jesus. It was Antipas who beheaded John the Baptist. It was Antipas to whom Pontius Pilate sent Jesus for trial. And it is Antipas's Galilee that interests us tonight because it's also Jesus' Galilee. So let's look at the Galilean towns where the gospel set Jesus' ministry. For us today, Nazareth is the best known place in Herod Antipas's Galilee. We know it as Jesus' hometown. It's often attached to his name, Jesus of Nazareth. But this would not have been so for people in Jesus' day. Nazareth was obscure, little known. Joshua chapter 19 lists 12 towns in the territory given to the tribe of Zebulun. Nazareth is not among them. Josephus, the Jewish historian of the 1st century AD, names 45 cities of the Galilee. Nazareth is not among them. The Talmud, produced by rabbis in the Galilee in the centuries immediately following the time of Jesus, lists 63 cities of the Galilee. And yes, you guessed it, Nazareth is not among them. Nazareth was an obscure village of little importance. Dr. Jim Fleming calls it the podunk of Galilee. Perhaps this helps us to understand Nathanael's comment upon hearing Philip tell him that he had found the Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Was Nathanael's retort. It was astonishing to him to think that the Messiah would come from such an obscure place. Now, many scholars today think that the Nazareth of Jesus' day was settled by a clan of Davidic descent returning from the exile. This clan was known as Netzer, from which Nazareth, Nazaret, takes its name. The Hebrew word means branch or shoot of a plant. And those scholars believe that the name comes from the words of the prophet Isaiah found in chapter 11 of his prophecy, foretelling the coming of the Messiah. He wrote, "A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots." This is in keeping with the fact that Joseph was of the house and lineage of David, and with Jesus' association with Nazareth. Now, Luke's Gospel tells of the Annunciation, how God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth to tell Mary that she had been chosen to bear God's Son. A Roman Catholic church in Nazareth stands over the traditional spot of the Annunciation, while a Greek Orthodox church is built over Mary's spring and also claims to be the location of the visit of Gabriel to the Virgin. Matthew tells us that after the death of Herod, the family settled in Nazareth. And Luke tells that Nazareth was Jesus' childhood home. We've pictured the boy Jesus working with Joseph in his carpenter shop. Matthew 13:55 tells us that Joseph was a carpenter, and Mark 6:3 tells us that Jesus himself was a carpenter. The Greek word translated carpenter in our English New Testament is tektonos in Matthew and tekton in Mark. Now, our English word carpenter has the specific meaning of a craftsman who works with wood, but these Greek words used by Matthew and Mark have the more general meaning of builder. This has led many scholars to think that Joseph and Jesus were probably construction workers, very likely stonemasons, given the abundance of stones in the Galilee and the fact that most buildings of that day were made of stone. And this would tell us that Jesus was a strong, robust man, able to move large, heavy stones, and it would dispel all of our ideas of gentle Jesus, meek and mild. It was to the Nazareth synagogue that Jesus came after his baptism and temptation to announce his public ministry. On that Sabbath, he took the scroll of the prophet Isaiah and read, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he's anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Jesus met a negative response in his hometown, and he soon relocated his ministry. Nazareth was an obscure village in the first century. In the days of Jesus' childhood, the most prominent city of Galilee was one that few people today have heard of. It was only a stone's throw from Nazareth, about 4 miles away. It was Sepphoris. Sepphoris was a larger Roman city. It was the capital of the Galilee during Jesus' childhood. Herod Antipas's palace was there. The larger city of Sepphoris had many construction projects, and it was perhaps where many of the builders of the day found work. Probably Joseph and Jesus worked there in construction projects rather than in tiny Nazareth where nothing much was being built. One Christian tradition holds that Jesus' mother, Mary, was from Sepphoris. In AD 20, Antipas moved his capital from Sepphoris to Tiberias. And much of Sepphoris has been excavated today, revealing fine buildings with wonderful mosaics, one very fine one known as the Mona Lisa of Galilee. Sepphoris is not mentioned in any of the Gospels. Isn't it interesting that the most important city of Galilee in Jesus' day is all but forgotten, while little, unimportant Nazareth is practically a household word? The Gospels record that Jesus' ministry took place in other towns near Nazareth, such as Cana, where Jesus performed his first sign at a wedding feast, turning water into wine, and Nain, where Jesus raised a widow's son from death. But very early in his public ministry, Jesus moved his headquarters from Nazareth to the plain of Gennesaret, on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Perhaps he did so because of his rejection in his hometown, but another reason for his move may have been the fact that the Via Maris ran through this area, making it more cosmopolitan and therefore more open to hearing his teaching than the provincial towns of central Galilee. Whatever his reasons for moving there, this became the area which was the scene of most of his public ministry. Most of Jesus' disciples were from this area. 11 of the 12 were Galileans. Only Judas Iscariot was from Judea, from the town of Kerioth. So he was known as Judas, the man from Kerioth. Ish is man in Aramaic, Ish Kerioth in Aramaic, Ish Iscariot in Greek and English. At least 3 and probably 5 of the disciples were from Bethsaida. Bethsaida means house of the fishermen, and it was well located for fishing. The Jordan River flows into the Sea of Galilee there through a marshy delta, and fish gather in that area to feed. The fishermen disciples were from Bethsaida, 2 sets of brothers, for sure Simon Peter and Andrew, sons of Johanan, and probably also James and John, sons of Zebedee. And John chapter 1 tells us that Philip was also from Bethsaida. Now, notice on the map that Bethsaida is on the east side of the Jordan River. That was the territory of Herod Philip, called Philippi. And it had a large Gentile population. In fact, Bethsaida lay adjacent to a larger Gentile, Hellenized town called Bethsaida Julius. So, being good Jewish boys, the Bethsaida fishermen tended to gravitate to the west and to the Jewish towns there. In fact, Peter married a girl from Capernaum and moved there. He lived in his mother-in-law's house, very near the synagogue. Now, the synagogue you see in Capernaum today was built 2 centuries after the time of Jesus on the site of the synagogue of Jesus' day. Under the present ruins, part of the synagogue of Jesus' day is visible. But nearby is the excavation of what is believed to be Peter's mother-in-law's house. This was probably the house where Jesus was healing, with many people crowding into the house when the men lowered the paralytic through the roof before Jesus. When this house was excavated, an octagonal church from the Byzantine period was found built carefully over the remains of a former building. On various levels of the excavation, pieces of plaster from the walls were found that contained graffiti. Now, when we see graffiti today, we think it's awful. But when an archaeologist finds graffiti, he's elated. The graffiti found in this house was on pieces of plaster from the walls of the ancient buildings, and they bore the names of Jesus and Peter. Strong evidence that this had been a house church from a very early time, and that it was a place held to be sacred because of its connection to Jesus and to Peter. Capernaum, though small, was quite a bustling town in Jesus' day. Located on the Via Maris, it had a marketplace and an industry of the manufacture of millstones. Many millstones made from the volcanic rock of the region have been found at Capernaum, and you'll see some examples of them when you go there. There was a centurion assigned to Capernaum by the Romans, sort of the highway patrol of that segment of the Via Maris. Jesus had dealings with this centurion, who was a God-fearer, which means a Gentile who was a believer in Judaism. And the Gospels tell us that this centurion even built the synagogue for the town. A regional tax collector for Rome was headquartered there, probably to collect the tolls from the caravans on the Via Maris, in addition to collecting Rome's taxes from the populace. Jesus reached out to this tax collector, and he became a follower. Matthew, the disciple and author of the gospel that bears his name. Now, Jesus carried out his ministry in all of these towns on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. In fact, draw a line from Magdala to Bethsaida, then from Bethsaida to Chorazin, and from there back to Magdala. 75 to 80% of Jesus' ministry took place within this tiny triangle with Capernaum right in the center. But more often, Jesus took his ministry out of the towns, to hillsides where he delivered the Sermon on the Mount, to the lakeside where he multiplied the loaves and fishes and fed the 5,000, and where once he stood in a boat to address the crowds on the shore, perhaps even this boat, a first-century fishing boat found in the mud of the lake in 1986, and which you can see displayed at Kibbutz Gennesar. And by the lakeside is where Jesus appeared to his disciples after the resurrection, prepared breakfast for them, and commissioned Peter to feed my sheep. Now, the perspective of the Gospels is from this northwestern shore of the lake. This is our side of the Sea of Galilee. But there were numerous occasions when the Gospels report that Jesus went to the other side. This was Gentile territory. The Roman cities of the Decapolis were here, along with their many satellite towns and villages. The Gospel writers tell us that Jesus went to the other side to withdraw from the crowds. The Gentile side was different from our side, where messianic expectations ran so high. Jesus could get away over there to pray, to teach his disciples, to rest. It was on that other side, probably in the vicinity of Gergesa or Kursi, that Jesus met the man possessed of demons and cast them out into a herd of swine that ran headlong into the lake and drowned. Now, an interesting thing to note is that when Jesus performed a sign on our side of the lake, he told the persons affected to tell no one about it. But on the other side, Jesus told them to tell everyone about it. He told the demoniac, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." Jesus knew that the messianic expectations of the Jews would run wild with these signs and they would miss the true meaning of his coming. But after the cross and resurrection, he told his followers to tell the world. In his dealings with the people on the other side, Jesus was setting in motion the mission to the Gentiles that would begin in earnest when his mission was completed. Jesus would frequently retire to the Gentiles' other side for his times of rest and prayer. There he could find respite from the crowds with their messianic expectations that caused them constantly to press Jesus with their demands and desires. Mark's gospel tells of the crowd's press upon Jesus, saying, "Many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat." And as Jesus' Galilean ministry was coming to an end, He would take His disciples over to the other side to teach them the things that they would need to know as His crucifixion approached. Once He took them deep into Gentile territory, to the vicinity of a city called Caesarea Philippi, located about 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee on the southwestern slopes of Mount Hermon. Now don't confuse this city with Caesarea Maritima on the Mediterranean coast, the city that Herod the Great built for the Romans as their capital of the province of Judea. Caesarea Philippi, located in the north, was so called because it was in the region ruled by Herod Philip. The Greek kings who ruled after the death of Alexander the Great had built the city and dedicated it to the Greek god Pan, naming it Panias. Herod Philip renewed the city in AD 14, renamed it Caesarea in honor of Caesar Augustus, and took it for his capital. The Gospels called it Caesarea Philippi to distinguish it from Caesarea Maritima. Caesarea Philippi was a bastion of paganism. There are cliffs there that are pocked with niches for images of the god Pan, half man and half goat. It seems that that vicinity had always been a seedbed of paganism. In Old Testament times, Dan, just a stone's throw away, had become a center of worship for Israelites who sought to incorporate paganism into the life of Israel. Jeroboam the first king of the northern kingdom of Israel, put a golden calf at Dan and called on all Israel to worship it. Pan was a god of fertility, and to worship him was supposed to ensure fertility for the lands and flocks of the worshiper. Pan was believed to retire into the underworld in the winter, emerging in the spring to bring fertility and new life to the earth. In Caesarea Philippi there was a cave from which a prolific spring poured water into the headwaters of the Jordan in Jesus' day, bringing great fertility to the region. The pagans believed that the cave was the gate to Hades, the underworld, and that Pan emerged from that grotto in the springtime. It was to the vicinity of Caesarea Philippi that Jesus brought His disciples not long before He began His final journey to Jerusalem and the cross. And there a very important conversation took place. Here's how Matthew tells about it. Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, He asked His disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, but others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." Immediately afterward, Jesus began to talk more and more about His death, and soon He would leave the Galilee behind, setting His face toward Jerusalem and the cross. But what about Tiberias, the city where your hotel in Galilee probably will be located? Tiberias was there in Jesus' day. It was built by Herod Antipas and named in honor of the Roman Emperor Tiberius, from whom Antipas received his kingdom. In AD 20, Antipas moved his capital there from Sepphoris, the hot springs just down the hill from the Royal Plaza Hotel, drew many people to Tiberias for their healing properties. But Tiberias is mentioned in the New Testament only in John's Gospel. Twice the Sea of Galilee is called the Sea of Tiberias. Only once is the city mentioned, in John 6:23. Jesus probably never set foot in Tiberias. Jews didn't go there. It was a Gentile city in the first place, but more problematic was the fact that it was built over a cemetery, making it ritually unclean for Jews. In AD 145, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai found a way to cleanse the city from ritual impurity, and Jews began to settle there. When the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem in AD 70, the Sanhedrin, the highest council of the Jews, was banished from Jerusalem. According to the Babylonian Talmud, the Sanhedrin was exiled from Jerusalem to Yavne, and from Yavne to Usha, and from Usha to Yavne, and from Yavne to Usha, and from Usha to Shepharam, and from Shepharam to Beit Shearim, from Beit Shearim to Sepphoris, and from Sepphoris to Tiberias. This was in AD 150. Tiberias became the home of Rabbinic Judaism in the 2nd century. Rabbis came to live there and to debate the issues of the Torah. The Mishnah and the Jerusalem Talmud, two very important works for Jews, were written in Tiberias. The graves of many of the great rabbis are there, such as the tomb of Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, very near the Royal Plaza Hotel. The rabbi's epithet means Rabbi Meir, who does miracles. And he's revered to this day. His tomb is a healing shrine for modern Jews. Rabbi Meir was a participant in the writing of the Mishnah in the 2nd century. And other famous rabbis are also buried here, Maimonides, Akiba, and others. But the thing that makes the Galilee special for Christians, that makes it more than interesting historical places to visit on our vacation, is that it is one of the stages on which God played out His greatest drama of redemption. The Galilee is the stage for the life and ministry of Jesus, the one whom Peter at Caesarea Philippi declared to be the Messiah, the Son of the living God, and whom we as later disciples proclaim to be no less. Jerusalem became another stage for this divine drama, the stage for the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So as we visit these places, we walk on holy ground indeed. Tune your spirit to these mysterious realities and experience the presence of Him whom Isaiah called Emmanuel, God with us, whom John called the Word made flesh. As you sense His presence, allow His Spirit to do His wondrous work in your spirit, the work of molding you in His blessed image. As the Apostle Paul put it, let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who though He was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied Himself, taking the form of a servant, being born in human likeness. And being found in human form, He humbled Himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God also highly exalted Him and gave Him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bend in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. In fancy I stood by the shore one day of the beautiful murmuring sea. I saw the great crowds as they thronged the way of the stranger of Galilee. I saw how the man who was blind from birth in a moment was made to see. The lame were made whole by the matchless skill of the stranger of Galilee. And I felt I could love Him forever. So gracious and tender was He. I claimed Him that day as my Savior, this stranger of Galilee. His look of compassion, His words of love, they shall never forgotten be. When sin-sick and helpless He saw me there, this stranger of Galilee. He showed me his hands and his riven side, and he whispered, it was for thee. My burden fell off at the pierced feet of the stranger of Galilee, and I felt I could love him forever. So gracious and tender was he. I claimed him that day as my Savior, this stranger of Galilee. Come ye who are driven and tempest-tossed, and his gracious salvation see. He'll quiet life's storms with his peace, be still. This stranger of Galilee, he bids me to go and the story tell. What he ever to you will be, if only you'll let him with you abide, this stranger of Galilee. Oh, my friend, won't you love him forever? So gracious and tender is he. Accept him today as your Savior, this stranger of Galilee.